Good evening, everyone. Hello, thank you all for coming. We'd like to warmly welcome you all here this evening. My name's Caleb. I'm a member of the Christian Union here at Warwick who are putting on these events today, and I'm a second-year PPE student.
Hi everybody, my name's Anna. I'm also part of the Christian Union. I'm a third-year sociology student. As the Christian Union, we exist on campus to give every student the opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel might not be a familiar word to you, but it basically means the good news of Jesus, hence why we have called this week Good News. And later on, Matt is going to come and talk to us about that.
But before that happens, I've got some really exciting admin to get out of the way first. So fire exits, there are 3 exits behind you. So where the green fire exit signs are, shockingly enough. And then your refuge point is the piazza. Yes, just making sure I get all of these details right. Alternatively, there are exits out the back. The refuge point there is Roots. And then if you have accessibility needs, you head out that way along the corridor. There's a lift at the end by the Chancellor Bar. So yeah, those are the fire exit details. That's my kind of airline hostess bit over.
Great. We're also throughout this event taking photos. If you don't want to end up on the Instagram, there are some orange lanyards at the back which you can just put on. And that means, I won't post you on there. Also, can I just ask that you turn your phones off? Put them on silent because we will need them later, just to make sure that there are no distractions. We want to be polite to Matt as he speaks. Speaking of, Matt,
and without further ado,
give him a clap.
Round of applause. Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey, everyone.
So, as we've said, this is Matt. Do you want to very briefly tell us who you are, what you do?
Hi everyone. My name's Matt, as they've said. I normally live in Cambridge. I'm hanging out here for the week, helping the CU run this week of events. And day to day, I work with an organisation called the Universities and Colleges Christian Fellowship, which exists to help Christian unions in universities across Britain do things like this. So that's what I do.
Brilliant. So the topic this evening is tragedy strikes. Why do bad things happen to people? Which is a reasonably heavy topic. So just be aware, we'll be dealing with some serious things tonight. Please feel free to chat to either of us or Matt at the end or anyone else from the Christian Union if these things strike home. But we're also going to start off with a question, as we normally do, but slightly more serious. When was the last time you cried?
When was the last time I cried? I was telling these guys earlier that since I became a dad, I've got 6 children. Since I became a dad about 16 years ago when my daughter was born, I've become emotionally incontinent. I cry at the smallest things. A car advert can make me well up. I can remember crying at an episode of Topsy and Tim on CBeebies. You guys ever watched that? I can remember literally crying it. But I think the last time, most recently, would probably have been when I was watching the great Pixar movie, Onward. Anyone seen Onward? Yeah, Barley and Ian are 2 elf brothers who go on a quest to try and spend 24 hours with their long-lost father. It is thrills, spills, enemies become friends, friends become enemies, and it's got an emotional sting in the tail, which is beautiful. I'd recommend it. It's very, very good.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that answer. And without further ado, we'll let you get on with your talk.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. And thanks for coming. It's really great to see you here. Yes, we're talking through this topic this evening, this question this evening. Why do bad things happen to people? Why is the world seemingly a broken place? And in one sense, that question, the very first word of that question is an extremely important one, isn't it? The word why. It was the philosopher Roger Scruton who said, what makes us human is that we ask questions. All the animals have interests and instincts. All the animals frame an idea of the world in which they live, but we alone question our surroundings. The question why is perhaps the most defining human question. As I've said, I have a number of children. I've got 6 children. I can remember one of my children coming out of school when he was quite young, coming out of school, and he'd obviously been eaten up by these why questions all day. Because as he walked out, it was almost before I'd even said, hey, how was your day, or anything else, he'd just come up to me, barreled up to me and said, Daddy, why is the sky blue, why is grass green, and why is our car black? And I was kind of slightly taken aback and was like, okay, interesting inquisitiveness. We had an interesting conversation about colour perception and all sorts of other things on the way home. But he seemed troubled all the way home. So I sort of said, something seems to be on your mind. What is it that's worrying you? He said, I have another question. Why is mummy? That was it. And I thought, am I missing something? Is that, like, has he turned into a philosopher? This is a deep existential question. Like, what's just happened? My 5-year-old son, why is mummy? And to be honest, that question still keeps me awake at night now. Why is mummy? I don't know. But the question why never really goes away, does it? They may become more sophisticated questions than my 5-year-old son was asking. But sometimes as we grow older, those why questions, they can become more intense, can't they? Perhaps we maybe get a little better at hiding them from time to time. But we find ourselves asking, why is the world like this? Why is my world like this? My experience of the world like this? And maybe sometimes the question of the night, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And Caleb's already mentioned, but tonight we are going to be talking about some quite difficult topics. We'll be talking about some heavy things, and I'm aware that could stir up things in you. And so please don't feel ashamed in any way at all. If you need to step out or even check out at any point, then that is absolutely fine. But we are going to be talking about some of these things because they're important. I think perhaps one of the times when that question became most clearest to me was a number of years ago. My first kind of adult life was as a doctor. I trained as a doctor. I'd studied medicine up in Newcastle. I worked as a doctor for about 8 years, and I spent a bit of time working in a hospice. And every doctor you speak to, every doctor you might get to know, will tell you that there will be patients that they look after who challenge everything they think about the world and who they can never really get out of their head. And there was one patient I looked after in that hospice who was like that. She was a wonderful young woman. She was about 32, 33. She had a 5-year-old son and a 6-month-old baby. And she also had terminal breast cancer. And her cancer was eating her up from the inside. And we were struggling to get on top of her pain. She was in agony. And doctors can do incredible things at looking after patients towards the end of their life and looking after pain. But we were struggling at that point, and she was suffering deeply. And I spent a lot of time with her husband, sitting, chatting with him, a lot of very tear-drenched conversations on both sides, crying with him at points. And I remember he once said to me, why is this happening, Matt? In fact, he didn't just say that once. That was almost every conversation. Why is this happening? She's a great mum. She's a great wife. She doesn't smoke. She doesn't drink heavily. Why is this happening to her? Why did she have to get cancer? One day, he asked me what I thought about God. And I said, well, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I trust in Jesus. And he said, yeah, I always believed in God too. But now this. I'm not so sure anymore. Why would he let this happen? And in so many ways, that crystallizes the question, doesn't it? It was George Bernard Shaw, sorry, the words are a little small, who said this. He said, how are atheists produced? In probably 9 times out of 10, what happens is something like this. A beloved wife or husband or child or sweetheart is gnawed to death by cancer, struck dumb by apoplexy, or strangled by diphtheria, and the looker-on, after praying vainly to God to refrain from such wanton and horrible cruelty, indignantly repudiates his faith in the divine monster and becomes not merely indifferent and skeptical, but fiercely and actively hostile to religion. There's the crux of the question. When it comes down to it, in a world that seems to be filled with pain and suffering, surely there's only 2 conclusions we can draw. Either God is not there, or he doesn't care. Either he's not there, or he doesn't care. And I want to make clear that in many ways, I don't feel like I am deeply qualified to talk about this topic. I have struggled with a few different things in my life. There have been points where my mental health has been very, very dark and very low. My wife and I struggled for a while to conceive, and we suffered the horrible instances of miscarriage in our early marriage. But I haven't really been through the ringer in quite the way my patient and her husband were going through. And I'm aware that for some in the room, it might be that you are going through the ringer right now, so much so that the whys in your heart aren't so much up here. They're in your heart. They're not just questions, they're screams. Why? Why is it like this? And I don't want to pretend there are any easy answers. But I also want to suggest that for answers that put God out of the picture, that mean that we turn away and walk away from the idea of God, all they end up doing is making the problem worse. They don't solve it. All they end up doing is increasing the ache. And to show that, what I want to do is to ask two questions this evening. And the first one is simply, does rejecting God actually solve the problem? Does rejecting God actually solve the problem? And some of you might be thinking, well, that's a stupid question. Of course it does. If there's no God, there's no problem. Suffering, it's just the way the world is. We just got to get on with it, right? That's that. So let me ask you another question then. Why, in that case, does it feel so wrong? Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting it isn't. But why does it feel that way? If that's simply the way the world is, what are we comparing the world to that it feels wrong? Because that's the thing, when suffering comes, it's not just a why that says this hurts and it's ouch. It's a why which says this isn't right. It shouldn't be like this. A few years ago, someone that I was following on Twitter, I'm not on X anymore, someone that I was following on Twitter back then had just lost their wife very suddenly. And they wrote this: "It feels very discombobulating to be an atheist and yet want to rage and rage and rage at the sheer cosmic injustice of this. Please don't tell me there is a just God. There clearly is not." Which kind of encapsulates the issue. She wants to rage and rage at the injustice. She thinks that this shows that there is no God, but if there is no God, then there is no justice. What is she comparing the world to that she thinks it should be any different? Where does that should come from? What are we comparing suffering to? If this world is all there is and suffering happens, then it's only what we should expect from a blind, pitiless universe. The universe doesn't care about us. It doesn't know us. It can't know us. So lots of people often frame this whole question as the problem of suffering, the so-called problem of suffering. And they say that it's a problem for belief in God. But I want to suggest that that is fair. It is a problem that we need to wrestle with. But calling it a problem, if the answer is to get rid of God, gives far too much away. Because it can only be a problem if there is a standard against which to compare it. A standard of justice, a standard of goodness, a standard of fairness, a standard of what should be in the world. And deep down, all of us know that, because the whys that we cry out when we see suffering say it should not be this way. We know that there is a should. And the question is, where does that come from? What world are we actually looking for? Why do we assume that the world should be any different to the one that we live in and have never known anything different to? Now, I know I've already said a lot there, just in the first few minutes of this evening. And as we've been doing every week, every night this week, we want to give you the opportunity to discuss these things, to have the chance to be able to chew these ideas over around your table. Now, I'm very aware that this evening this might be touching on some very personal things. So if you want to just sit and listen around your table, that's absolutely fine. Don't feel you have to engage in the discussion. But we want to give the opportunity because we think these things are worth talking about. And so I'm going to take a pause just now to have an opportunity to discuss. And it may be that I've already said some stuff and you're just like, yeah, no, I don't agree with that. That's fine. And as I've said each night, I would love it if you would vocalize that. Turn to the person next to you and say, no, I didn't agree with what he was saying there. As long as you're prepared for that person next to you to ask, oh, that's interesting, why? Why didn't you agree? So that you can discuss it. But if you need some help, Here's a couple of questions that might get you going. First one, how might our reactions to suffering reveal the sense of what the world should be like? How might that happen? And more importantly, how would you account? How would you account, based on what you know and what you think, for where that idea of the way the world should be like comes from? I'm going to give you a few minutes to chat that around your table, and I'll be back in a little while. I'm just going to break into your conversations there. Sorry, there will be more opportunities to keep discussing. So if you're in the middle of a really good going conversation, try and hold that thought, and we'll be able to pick it up again in a few minutes. One of the other things that we want to do this week is to give an opportunity for to hear people's stories of the way in which they have encountered the good news of Christianity and the way in which it's perhaps been pertinent to the questions that we're thinking about. And we're going to do that this evening. by hearing from Sam, who's a current student. So could you welcome Sam up? He's going to come and join me. All right, I think you're on. Excellent. Is Sam on? Can you hear me? Excellent, good. There we go. I got thumbs up from there, and then so I said good prematurely, didn't I? Never mind. Sam, it's great to have you here. Would you tell us who you are, what you study? Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Sam, as you've heard. I do GSD and politics, and I'm in my second year here.
Great, thank you. And I know that you, because you told me earlier on, that you grew up in a home where Christianity was around at home. How would you describe your understanding of God as you grew up?
I grew up doing the whole normal Christian thing, going to church. My family, or at least my parents, were Christian. I didn't really enjoy it. I found it boring most of the time. And looking back on it now, I can't remember most of the things I heard in church. But yeah, I sort of did the whole Christian thing. And I always remember sort of understanding sort of scientifically or intellectually God sort of has to exist and the Bible has to be true. I knew lots about God, but I mean, looking back now, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, I didn't know God personally. So I think that's the big thing for me. Growing up, I knew lots about God, but I didn't know God personally. And yeah, I actually sort of didn't like going to church. I remember praying, and I'd pray when I'd need things, like sort of God's a vending machine. I'm sure we've all gone through it. Like everyone's a Christian when they're on a plane and it's going down. So when I was injured or when I was sort of failing my exams and stuff like that, I'd pray. But yeah, I didn't have that relationship with God.
So kind of an awareness of God, maybe an assumption that he was there. And maybe a kind of initially, when things are difficult, an instinct to move towards him. We're talking about some hard things, times when life can be really hard, things can shake us. What's been your experience of times like that?
Yeah, I think sort of things, I was very much coasting, and then it got to year 12, and sort of the first week of year 12, this long-term friend of mine committed suicide, and that sort of it sort of shook my life, what I thought to be sort of normal and fine, and like friend groups sort of suffered from that, and I think that really troubled me, as it would, and I'd sort of grown up with him, and then a week later, just to sort of make things worse, I was out with friends. And I was involved in some sort of fight, unprovoked, and I ended up getting stabbed a few times. And while I was being chased, after they'd stabbed me, I got picked up by this lady in this car on this road which no one would ever drive down. And before she saw me, she came out her car and sort of shouted at me as I was being chased, like, "Do you need to go to the hospital?" I was like, "Yes, please, I need to go." So I got in the car. She drove me there, and yeah, I got to hospital, and it was fine. And I mean, looking back on it now, I do think like she quite possibly saved my life that evening. But, yeah, I just remember. Yeah, is this one working? Oh. Much louder. This is great. I remember, yeah, so I got her number. I typed in her number. It didn't exist. And then, people tried to find it. I couldn't find her. I wanted to pay for the damage I did in her car. But, yeah, poor lady, if she's still out there. But, yeah, I think those two events really sort of shook my life. And, yeah, that's...
I mean, they would.
Yeah.
And how did those events kind of shape your view of God at that time?
Yeah, I think I still, in the back of my mind, as I think is in a lot of the back of our minds, you sort of know there's something more than the material. There's a wonderful verse in the Bible which goes, "He set eternity in the hearts of all men." And it's so true. And I always knew God existed. He was there, but I didn't want him to exist because I wanted to be my own God. And with the people around me and with me, I romanticized the idea that nothing really matters. And it led down quite a destructive hole that year. Finding happiness and pleasure in the wrong things, and sort of friends didn't help. But yeah, I think sort of not wanting God to exist, almost hated him for what happened. I remember after my friend passed away, I cried out to God, why did you do this? And in some ways, there's lots of questions like that where we will never know the answer. But yeah, I remember crying out, and I think during that period, I just sort of hated God, but I hated a God I knew was still there, which is a really rough position to be in.
It almost feels to be quite entrapping to be in that position. Obviously, you're now here, you're part of the Christian Union, and you're here trying to tell this story under the title of Good News.
Yeah.
So
it's coming.
The obvious question is, like, what happened from where you were there, where you've just described, to where you are now over the last couple of years? What's happened?
Yeah, God is so good. I remember, so at the end of this year, where I'd sort of lived quite differently to how I had, and I'd sort of gone my own way, tried my own thing. I was my own God. I got to the end of that year, and I was really quite miserable. And I remember being at my cousin's wedding, and I'd spoken to a friend there, and I just felt really like the need to ask him or tell him. I'm at a crossroads, and I felt so spiritually lost. Because, I mean, you touched on this before, but if God isn't real, the alternative is so much worse. And I think I realized that, and I realized living my own way wasn't working. So he was very gracious, and he prayed with me, and he shared this story, this really small story of how he prayed for the rain to stop for an event he was doing, and the rain didn't stop, and it just kept on pouring. It got worse, and they couldn't hold this event. And he was like, why on earth this is a good event. I want to put it on. But he said, actually, what happened because we couldn't put on that event, I won't go into it, but good things came from that. And I think just that really small story of continued faith helped me understand that we live in God's universe, not our own. And that's a wonderful thing, because God is so much wiser, so much more loving, so much more powerful than we are. And I think I never humbled myself before God in that same way. So I prayed with him. I prayed that God would forgive me from the bad things I'd done, because I needed that. We all need that. And I prayed that God would be with me, that God would help me humble myself before him, that God would give me the right attitude. And I came to love the fact that I was coming to serve and coming before a God who wasn't this like distant figure in the sky who sort of is really powerful but doesn't really love me. But he loves me so much that he died for me. And he hates the bad in the world. He hates the evil in the world so much that he had to die to overcome it. So he came into a world of suffering and a world of death to die so that we can go to heaven and be with him. And I think, again, I knew this, but the devils believe in God. But I didn't know God personally. So I prayed, and I felt such peace. And it was from that point on, I think, I became the biggest sinner I knew, because sin hurts. Sin is against God, because it's his universe. And God is so gracious, and he helped me. He gave me a new heart, and he helped me follow him and trust in him. He gave me faith, and it's from all these things which, they represent how good God is. Christians are witnesses of God's goodness, and so is history. But yeah, I could go on, so I will stop.
Sam, thank you so much. It's been quite powerful to hear your story and some of the things that you've been through, but wonderful to hear where that's led. Can we say thank you to Sam?
Thank you.
It's quite a story, isn't it? And there was a moment there when Sam was describing his absolute conviction that God was there, but his real perplexity as to what God was actually like. If God isn't is if God is there, if we can't say God isn't there because that won't solve the problem, as I've already suggested, then you might be forgiven for saying, well, actually, haven't you just made the problem worse? If we can't say God's not there, aren't we just left with God doesn't care, which would be horrendous. He'd either be impotent and powerless or maybe even cruel and heartless. So I said I was going to ask two big questions in response to our question tonight. Here's the second one. Second question I want to ask is it possible that God might have good reasons for the suffering and pain that people experience? Is it possible that God could have good reasons for allowing that pain? And if the first question sounded like a stupid question, I am aware that that question might sound at best insensitive and worst downright offensive. But stick with me for a minute. I said I was a doctor in a previous life, and I worked for a number of years, and I worked in all sorts of different medical departments in hospital, and for about 6 months I worked in a diabetes ward in the hospital. And some of you might be thinking, a hospital ward for diabetes patients, as in people who are in the hospital with diabetes. I thought diabetes was, I know people with diabetes, I thought it was a difficult thing, people have to inject themselves with insulin and all that sort of thing, but why are they needing to be in hospital? And the answer is because diabetes, if it gets to its end stage, is a really horrible disease. The way that the sugar imbalance in the blood attacks the body is that it can destroy all of the small nerves in your hands and your feet. It does a lot of other things too, but that's one of the things it can do, which means that I was looking after patients who had to have amputations of their lower legs because they'd been walking around with a stone in their shoe for a few weeks and didn't know. And it had become infected. If you ask somebody like that in that position if there is a good reason for pain, they will give you a very straight answer. Yes. Because that's the point. All of the whys of our suffering, that our suffering triggers, actually are asking two questions. There might be a why which is saying, what's the purpose of this? What's the goal of this? It feels meaningless. But there is another why which asks, what's the cause of this? Why is this happening? Every single time we hear the news of some latest terrible crime, one of the immediate instincts is to seek the perpetrator, find out who was it who did this, who was to blame. But there are also a whole load of other questions asked as well, aren't there? What triggered that person to do those things? What was their upbringing like? What abuse did they maybe face? What caused that? That we have this deep embedded sense that there is something or someone to blame when things go wrong like this, a sense of justice which demands that there be a cause. And halfway through the accounts of Jesus' life that you've got on the tables in front of you that were written by a first century doctor called Luke, that is the question that is in the air. I'd love everybody to grab hold of these orange booklets that are in front of you that say Uncover on the front. This is a copy of Luke's Gospel from the Bible, a first century account of Jesus' life. And we're going to turn to page 79, around about halfway through. And Jesus is confronted with some breaking news. It's basically what happens here. Some people come to him and confront him with a breaking news story. Have a look. Big number 13, halfway down the page. Now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. I mean, it sounds like it's a fairly kind of matter-of-fact thing, but you just pause for a second and think about what has just been said. That is the worst case of despotism that you could possibly think of. Here are some people who are going to worship. It's a kind of news story that would have kind of some scenes may be disturbing on it, right? Some people who are going to worship. They're not rebels against Pilate and against the Roman authorities. And he has them killed, and worse, he has their blood mixed in with their act of worship. It's not just murder, it's also desecration of what they're doing, and frankly, it's mocking them even after their death. And the event asks its own question. Like, the why isn't even asked. But the people around Jesus, it turns out, are tempted to draw a pretty horrible conclusion. That Jesus sees it coming. Have a little look at number 2. Jesus answered, "Do you think that these Galileans were worse than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way?" It turns out that victim blaming is nothing new. It's not a 21st century phenomenon. It was happening in the first century too. And Jesus sees right through it. Do you think there were worse sinners that this happened to them? He won't have it. I tell you no, he says. And then just to make sure that the people he's talking to have really got it, he brings in his own local news story, his own headline. He takes in not something that where some act of cruelty has happened. Thanks, Caleb. I'm going to swap mics. Not something where some act of cruelty has happened, where there's easily an obvious despot like Pilate to blame. But he takes in a tragic incident where 18 people have died through something that just seems completely meaningless. Little number 4, how about those 18, this is Jesus talking, those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them? Do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? Again, he says, I tell you, no. He won't have it. And you have to say, of course he won't have it. There are times in the world where somebody's actions can lead directly to suffering, sometimes even directly to their own suffering. You get very, very drunk, get in a car, crash it, break your leg. Your broken leg is a result of your own actions. There are times when that can happen. But we know deep down, we know not just deep down, we know on the surface, the world does not work that way, that you can just blame something, say bad things happen to bad people. They must have been bad, even if we can't see. That's not how the world works. And Jesus is clear, it is not how the world works. But where does that leave all our whys? All our searches for reasons, all our searches for cause. You know, many will say there's really only one option. When it push comes to shove, you're looking for someone to blame. When the question gets big enough, there is one place to lay the blame, and that is at the feet of God himself. It's the kind of sentiment that caused Stephen Fry quite famously to say this when he was asked what he would say to God if he came face to face with him. He said, I'd say bone cancer in children. I'd say worshippers having their blood mixed in with their sacrifices. What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is so much misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world that is so full of injustice and pain? It's pretty clear, isn't it? It must be God's fault. But do you notice he's still working with a shouldn't or a should? Where does his idea of what should or shouldn't be the case come from? And in the end, we're often left crying with King Lear, like flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. And that's what we think. But as Jesus is confronted with this question, with tenderness in his eyes, he turns the question right back on his hearers. He gives his answer twice. It's not an easy answer to hear. But this is what he says, little number 3, I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. He gives the same answer after that he's told the story of the tower. I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. Jesus' answer is a very careful one. He's saying there are no neat explanations, the 1 + 1 = 2 in terms of suffering. There is no neat explanation that answers the question why something is happening, but those whys do suggest that something is wrong, and yes, Jesus says something is wrong. But here's the shock. Jesus' suggestion is that the problem, lies with us. God is the source of all good by very definition. The Bible insists, Jesus insists repeatedly that God is a good Father. He is the source of all good, or the source of light and life and love. And God made people for relationship with himself, to enjoy him. Here's the thing about the relationship between a creature and a creator. It's not a symmetrical relationship between you and your mate. It's more like, but much more than, a relationship between a subject and their king. The question is, will they serve their king? The question is, will humanity serve God as their king? Or will we instead set up 8 billion individual kingdoms of me with all of our own definitions of what is right and wrong, and all of our own definitions of how the world might work and how we want to be? Do you remember what Sam said? I felt like I was living as my own God. But that is what we do. And suffering is the result, sometimes directly, because not all of those individual kingdoms are compatible with one another. And different definitions of what is right and wrong and good and bad clash with one another. but very often indirectly too, as a result of the fractured relationship that we have with our Creator who made us, with those around us, and the fractured relationship with creation itself, the world God made. So here's the thing, Jesus' suggestion about suffering, his analysis of the problem, his diagnosis is that suffering is a problem that needs not just a solution, not just an explanation, it needs a solution. Not an explanation so that we can understand it, but a solution so that we can solve it. And do you hear his solution? He uses that word, which is a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? He uses that word, repent. Turn back, he says, to the God who made you. Now notice, this is not what he's saying. He's not saying be moral and nothing bad will happen to you. But he is saying don't face a broken and suffering world without the God who made you. But the question all of our whys are going to stir up is, can I really do that? Can I trust him that he's good? Does he really care, given all of this? And that if the headlines that Jesus is confronted with show us Jesus' diagnosis of the problem, well, the very next episode shows Jesus' treatment of the problem. Have a turn over the page to the next page and have a little look at number 10. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward. Here was Jesus facing a woman who is literally bent over, literally bent down under the weight of her suffering. He sees her suffering. Someone who's been suffering for 18 years notices the unnoticeable. Around him, if we've just heard is right, there's going to be a whole load of people looking at her going, my goodness, what has she done to deserve that? Not in a questioning way, but in an accusatory way. But Jesus' compassion is as obvious as her suffering. He calls her forward, he gets involved, and notice this is a lot more than pity. This is divine compassion because he's about to show divine power. Little number 12, when Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Do you hear it? You're set free. Because at the end of the day, that's the problem with suffering, isn't it? It's oppressive. It squashes us. It squashes us down. It traps us. But Jesus offers to set her free, and then does. He doesn't offer an analysis. He doesn't offer an explanation. He simply confronts her suffering itself and brings freedom instead of theory. So the problem of suffering is a problem which demands a solution far more than it demands an explanation. And the Christian claim, the reason why Christians say it's good news, is that Jesus has the compassion and power to offer that solution. Now, I'm aware that you've just heard a lot. And as I said earlier on, we want to give opportunity and space to discuss these things and to disagree with them and to turn to one another and say, I didn't agree with that, or how could that possibly be? That's absolutely fine as long as you're willing to have the person next to you ask, interesting, why don't you agree with those things? But we're going to have another moment of discussion now, and here's a couple of questions if you need them to get you going. What questions would you ask or confront Jesus with if he was standing right in front of you? What headlines might you confront him with? And I have just said a couple of times, suffering doesn't need an explanation as much as it needs a solution. Do you agree? If so, why? If not, why not? I'm going to give you a few minutes, and then I'll be back. Okay, for the last time, I'm going to just cut into your conversations there. There is going to be loads of opportunity to keep on talking, keep on discussing in a moment, and then over dinner as well, which will be happening shortly. But as we come to a close, I wanted to finish really with kind of a summary of what we've seen, and perhaps an opportunity to just think about these things just one more time. I've been saying that suffering causes the question why, prompts the question why. Why is the world like this? And it's coming from that feeling that it should not be like this. And really, there are many, many theories of people will talk about suffering and what those answers to that question why might be. But the one thing that is undeniable is that suffering yells there is a problem. There is something wrong. Something should not be like this. And often the first thing we do is chase explanations, chase understanding. But Jesus, in the pages of Luke's gospel, offers himself not as an explanation, but as a solution. Because the point is, he's not wandering around Galilee just sort of bumping into pain and being compassionate towards it at this point. He's far more intentional than that. By this point, as the pages that we've just been looking at halfway through Luke's account of his life, Jesus is already on his way to Jerusalem to do something about the suffering that is around him and that he sees and that you see and that I see. He's on his way to do something about it. Because if the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart, the issue is that humans have turned away from the God who is our creator. We are not relating to him as we are invited to or as we ought to. But here's the thing, when that relationship is between a king and his subjects, that's called rebellion. And there are two ways of putting down a rebellion if you're a king. One is crush the rebels. But that's not God's way. Because the second is change the rebels. Invite them to change sides, call them to change sides, offer them forgiveness, maybe even challenge them to change sides. And that is what God is doing in Jesus. That is what is happening at the heart of the Christian faith. Because on the cross, Jesus bears the justice that our turning away from God deserves and dies a death, enters our suffering, not just to identify with us in it, but to suffer for us. A death that, as I said last night, invented the word excruciating from the cross. Which means that as we see the suffering around us on the news, or perhaps as you sit in the muck with a friend as their world collapses, or as your own life cracks, and the why becomes not just a niggling question, but an inward scream, sometimes even maybe an outward scream. God's answer is not just a tidy theory. He's not just going to explain what's going on. His answer is Jesus crucified and risen from the dead. That is God's answer. The one in whom divine compassion and power meet as he reaches out and straightens up that bent lady. And that's his offer to you. Suffering makes us long for justice. It makes us long for help. It makes us long for hope. And Jesus' invitation on the pages of this book of Luke's Gospel is that you can find them in him. Justice, help, hope, purpose, meaning, love. He says to you, find them not in an explanation, but in me. And so as we come to an end, I want to ask, we've seen this story as the crowd confront Jesus with the headlines, and as Jesus then encounters this woman oppressed and bowed down by her suffering. It's as though Luke is saying to each one of us, where are you in that story? Where do you find yourself in that story? Some in the room might think, well, I'm kind of in the crowd, sort of listening in, watching the news, seeing the headlines, asking why. Some in the room might think, well, I'm with the woman, afflicted, bowed down, oppressed by pain now. all of us have our whys for one reason or another. But behind all of our whys, Jesus asks a different question. And his question is, will you turn to me? Will you turn to him, the one who stepped into pain and suffering, not just to identify with us in it, but to suffer for us as he died that death? He asked, will you trust me with your pain? And one day he promises, you will hear, if you trust in him, the one who died and the one who rose again to new life without pain and suffering, you will hear him say, you are set free. And as I ask that question, will you turn to him? I'm aware that there's probably a number of responses in the room to that question. Some in the room will be going, well, yes, I have. Some, like Sam. Yes, I have. And it's great. And I want to keep on pressing on. Keep on getting to know him. Some will be thinking, I don't know. This all sounds pretty big. Maybe it sounds too good to be true. Maybe it sounds untrue. Maybe it sounds like pie in the sky. I don't know. Well, can I encourage you not to leave this alone? These things are too big to be left alone until you're sure. Keep coming back this week. We've got more events over the next couple of days to keep on exploring these things. Another couple of things you might want to do. These books, these Uncover Luke Gospels, are designed to be read with someone, to explore the claims about Jesus together. So we would love you to take one away and to ask someone to read it with you. Perhaps ask someone you came with or a member of the Christian Union, would you read that Uncover book with me so that I can look into this more? And if you'd like to think a little bit more, then there's a bookstall at the back over here, that you can pick up a number of different books on all sorts of different topics for free. Tonight, I'd like to suggest one by a guy called Jeremy Marshall. He wrote this book whilst he was dying from terminal cancer. It's called Meeting Jesus, and it simply walks through a bunch of different encounters with Jesus, like the one that woman had from the Gospels, and what they teach us about him. So grab a book. Take a copy of Luke's Gospel, ask someone to read it with you, come back. But I also am aware that there might be some people in the room who are like, I've been looking at this for a little while. I've come along this week, I've had conversations with friends, and actually I'm thinking, I know I haven't, but I want to say yes to Jesus' invitation. I want to turn to him. I want to trust him with my pain, whatever that might be in the future, even though I don't know. I think he's worth trusting. Well, if that's you, what I want to do, just as we begin to come to an end, is to give you the opportunity to do that. To give you the opportunity to say yes to that invitation from Jesus. And for a lot of us, you might be thinking, well, this is really weird. The evening's got really weird. You know what? I don't really care. What's more natural than speaking to somebody who loves you this much? If you've already been hearing his voice tonight, then here's an opportunity to speak back to him and say yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a prayer. I'm going to pray a prayer, and you can join me with it, just so that you know that I'm not messing around. I'm going to read the prayer so you can hear it first, and then I will pray it, and you can join in with me if you would like to. Here's how it goes. It says, Lord Jesus, I am beginning to see that I am made for a relationship with you. I'm sorry that I have turned from you as the source of light and life and love. Thank you that you died for me. Please forgive me and grant me the life you promise as I begin to follow you. If you'd like to pray that prayer with me, then I'm going to pray it now. And you can pray it just quietly. You don't need to pray it aloud. Pray it quietly where you are. Lord Jesus, I am beginning to see that I am made for relationship with you. I am sorry that I've turned from you as the source of light and life and love. Thank you that you died for me. Please forgive me and grant me the life you promise as I begin to follow you. Amen. Can I say, if you've just prayed that prayer for the first time, God has heard it. It'd be really great to tell someone. Tell someone that you came with. Please come and tell me. I'm going to be over at the back by the bookstall as people come and get food. You can just slip away. Just quietly come and talk to me. If you'd like to come and challenge me on anything, ask me any questions, then I'll be up there. I'll be over there too. Do come and chat with me. But I'd like us all to just do one more thing. Was that okay? Could you just bear with me for one more time? If you could all grab your phone, because we're going to put a QR code up on the up on the board now. And I'd love everybody to do this, just so that no one feels really awkward, particularly anyone who might have prayed that prayer just now, quite a personal moment. And that QR code will take you to a feedback form that the CE would love to hear your views, your thoughts on this event tonight. And there's only 3 boxes on it. The first one is, which event did you come to? Just write Wednesday evening. That's absolutely fine. And then there's a response in there. And I'd just like you to suggest that you just write 4 words in there. It might be that you just want to just say, well, thanks for the food. So you just write, thank you for the food. That's fine. It may be that you're just like, absolutely not. This was all completely silly. So you might just want to write, this is all rubbish. That's fine. Won't be offended at all. If you're thinking you'll come back, you could write, I will come back. If you want to look into these things a little bit more, you could write one of 2 things. You could write, invite me to church. Going to church for the first time can be a weird experience. It's much, much more secure to go with someone. And someone from the Christian Union would love to take you to church if you would like to explore these things more. So write, invite me to church. If you want to read Luke's Gospel with someone in the Christian Union, then please write, read Luke with me, 4 words. And then if you prayed that prayer with me just now, could you do something for me? Could you write 3 words? Could you just write, count me in? And then if you've written one of those, invite me to church, read Luke with me, or count me in, just pop your contact details in the box that says contact details, and someone with the Christian Union will be in touch to be able to follow up with those things, help you take those first steps following Jesus, if that's you, invite you to church, or invite you to read Luke with them. That's our time nearly up. We're going to give you an opportunity just to keep those conversations going, those discussions going for just a few more minutes, about 10 minutes or so before dinner is ready. We can eat and then carry on talking for as long as you like. As ever, there's a couple of questions that are going to crop up on the screen. I've left my clicker, guys, over there, so you can put them up. Thank you very much. Here's a couple of questions just to get you going. Again, you might just have loads of questions from all what I've said. Just talk about them, that's fine. But if you need any help, how about these 2 questions? What could help you keep exploring Jesus' powerful compassion that we've seen depicted this week? And then if you're feeling brave and there's someone on the table that you'd like to ask a Christian friend how knowing Jesus has made a difference to their experience of hard times. Thank you so much for listening to me this evening. As I say, I'll be over by the bookstall. If you want to pick up anything with me, come and chat. Come and ask any questions. That'd be great. But our host will be back up in about 10 minutes, and then it will be dinner time. But for now, a bit more discussion time. Thanks.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Sorry to stop your conversations. I promise this is the last time you'll be interrupted by us tonight. But I just, wanted to reiterate what Matt said about the bookstore at the back. The Uncover Lukes you have on your tables are completely free for you to take. Like, they are a gift to you from us as a CU. Please take one home. But we have an abundance of books on the bookstore, so please go and check them out. There are also bookmarks over there, which are actually really cool. So I would recommend going and grabbing one.
Yes, and also, again, to reiterate what Matt said, if you've got questions, please continue your conversations, or come and chat to either of us, anyone that's wearing a CU hoodie, a friend who brought you along, or Matt. Any of us would be happy to answer any of your questions. We've also got more talks over the course of the rest of this week. Those are on these flyers that are on all of your tables, and some of you will have seen, hopefully most of you will have seen going on around campus. We've got tomorrow, does suffering disprove a loving and all-powerful God? Where is God in my life? Does God always welcome me? And then a quiz in the evening.
I hear the quiz will be good. I actually missed it last year because Liverpool were playing football, but I just checked BBC Sport, and unless you support like Accrington, you should be there. So I would recommend. Also on your tables, there are these flyers. On a Wednesday, the CU typically meets for our main meeting. You can read about that on these. It's a little bit earlier than what we've met tonight, but you're so welcome to join us next week. And there's also on there is the mixed footy. I actually went along to mixed footy last week, and it was so much fun. My skills were incredible, too good I won't show up again. No, I joke. I just went to take photos. But yeah, I'd really recommend going along. If you have questions, come and chat to me, and I can point you in the right direction. But yeah, please take one of them home with you. And also, many things to take home. There's also a Hello, Nice to Meet You booklet, which has kind of some basic information about Christianity, some stories inside of people from the CU about Jesus, and then on the back about how you could find out about church if that's interesting to you. So please, also take one of those home.
Yeah, and as we have had with all of the evening talks this week, we've got dinner after this, which is please stick around, have some dinner. The main meal is lasagna, which I hear some excitement in the room. That's a lot of excitement. That's great. Speaking of lasagna, my sister bet me that I couldn't make a car out of lasagna. You should have seen her face when I drove past her. I'll go in a minute. But yeah, thank you very much all for coming. I hope you've had a great evening. Please stick around for the meals, stick around for conversations. We've got board games afterwards. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you again at some point soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Over to